Hey everybody, this is JD Gaming back today with an updated version of Lair of Darkness. Now, if you're like me, you immediately saw Ancient Fairy Dragon on the new Forbidden list and thought, oh, that's a big hit to a lot of these decks here. And for the longest time, I thought that was the case. I saw some other variants of Lair of Darkness, like the Sky Striker variant, which I admit is pretty darn cool, using Ray, who's a dark monster who tributes herself in order to, combo off, gain more advantage through that engine, and having 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍, who exits and enters the main monster zone, effectively juggled very nicely between those themes. I thought that was a very cool theme, but I wanted to do something different with this deck, and I definitely didn't want to shelve it after one session, because that'd be such a shame for how much hype this deck originally had. As I was looking through just my random stuff, I had picked up 3 copies of Toon Table of Contents from Dark Saviors, figured, I've never used this thing before, but it's pretty good in general, and then it dawned on me that that card is the perfect glue for everything you want to do with Lair of Darkness. So, to explain real quick, it does 2 things. We searched our Toon Cannon Soldier, or our Blue Eyes Toon Dragon. So Cannon Soldier, if you remember, just got hit in the OCG, hence my kind of excitement with this deck, but also I'm trying to get this thing out while it's still legal as a budget pick in the TCG. But anyway, Toon Table of Contents lets us search our Cannon Soldier, who lets us tribute a monster in order to deal damage to our opponent, 500 per monster, and that's not restricted to once per turn, hence why it was forbidden in the OCG. Cool thing with a Cannon Soldier, though, is it's a dark monster, which means not only does it trigger 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍 on its own, but you can use it with Lair of Darkness to tribute your opponent's monsters, and now with 3 Toon Tables, you have effectively 4 kaijus that are easily accessible that help kickstart your main boss monster onto the field from hand or grave. So that was a really impressive part. But on top of that, sometimes you don't need that extra monster. You don't want Toon Cannon Soldier. So then you go and search your Blue Eyes Toon Dragon, who lets you play this engine here with Melody of Awakening Dragon and Trade-In, and that gives you a lot of search and draw power in exchange for a 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍, who is a level 8 dragon monster who fits that stat line. So again, Toon Table just happens to fit everything we would like in this strategy, allowing us to make it into a Toon Lair of Darkness turbo strategy, getting our boss monster out, and then allowing us to do all of our nice little tech pieces that we did in the original version of Lair of Darkness. Anyway, this is going to be a let's build, so I'm going to go through and explain all my card choices, reasonings for things, and mention some things along the way that you could play instead or on top of the things that I'm doing here. If you just want to see the list, feel free to check out the description box below. I have a timestamp, as always, in a convenient little table of contents that'll throw you right towards the end of the video where you're seeing the alphabetical profile, and then if you have any questions after that, feel free to check out the middle of the video where I go through and explain, hopefully in some decent detail. But without further ado, let's build Toon Lair of Darkness Turbo. The first step in any deck is to establish the theme and to build its core, and like we mentioned, we're going to be building around the field spell Lair of Darkness. So this is an easy 3 of in this particular strategy, especially with the decreased access thanks to, the Ancient Fairy Dragon part being removed, but this field spell does a few neat things. First, all face-up monsters on both sides of the field become a dark monster, so that's pretty interesting if you need to fight around like a Nat Beast summon or some other attribute-focused requirement that your opponent may have for their link monsters or whatever. Then, once per turn, if you would tribute a monster you control to activate a card effect, so for cost or whatever, you can go and tribute one of your opponent's dark monsters, even though they have it and it's not under your control, instead of your own monster, which is pretty neat. That lets you go and tech with a lot of the cards that we'll be picking for the strategy. And then once per turn during the end phase, you special summon as many of these torment tokens, 1000 attack and defense, level 3, dark monsters in defense position onto the turn player's field, up to the number of monsters that were tributed while this card was face up on the field. So pretty interesting. Mostly the torment tokens are just additional dark monsters you can use as advantage, and it kind of balances out the aspect of this, because if you tribute your opponent's cards during their turn, which you will be doing a lot in this deck, it does give them something back, but it's your turn then at that point, so then you could go ahead and just econ or whatever those cards to you. So lots of really cool effects. How are we going to do this? Well, first of all, we have to make sure we get Lair of Darkness out into our hand, and the first way that we do that is through one of the key monsters. 3 copies of 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍, the Wicked Warden, which basically can be discarded from our hand, and it's one of those classic field spell searches. It lets you go and add Lair of Darkness from your deck to your hand. So essentially now we have 6 copies of this so far, and then if you already have Lair of Darkness, that's fine. You could summon this thing and then tribute a dark monster, could be itself, in order to draw a card. And if you happen to tribute a dark monster other than this to activate this effect, so it could be another one of your guys, or you Lair of Darkness, tribute one of your opponent's monsters, and it could be any monster because they're all dark now, and you're able to go ahead and search instead of drawing a dark monster with 2,000 or more defense from your deck to your hand, and you can only use that tribute effect of Warden once per turn. So the cool thing with this, 17 body on a level 4 is already pretty solid. Lets us go and terraforming essentially into our Lair of Darkness spell, but on top of that, it lets us search Darkest Diabolos, which is the only real target of that 2,000 or higher defense from our deck. But, lets us get our boss monster, lets us upstart, and I really like, even though it's not a quick effect, you are able to get rid of your opponent's monsters through this card as well. And then, as you may have figured, 3 copies of Terraforming. This is kind of why I was blundering into saying 9 copies of Lair of Darkness in this deck, because now we have 3 of the field spell, Terraforming, and Arima. So, yeah, you don't have Ancient Fairy Dragon, but this deck is still quite consistent at getting these things, plus we'll load this deck up with draw spells as well. But the cool thing with Terraforming is we can also still play the 1 copy of Dragon Ravine. I cut the shrines and cut the other Dragon Ravine because we don't have Ancient Fairy Dragon to take advantage of with the Destrudo anymore, but Dragon Ravine still lets you discard any card from your hand, so fix things up, yard extra copies of Diabolos or whatever, in order to send a dragon from your deck to the grave. So in the instance that you don't have Darkest Diabolos already in the graveyard, this thing essentially becomes 4 copies through your Terraforming that you have access to Darkest Diabolos. So I definitely like the 1 copy tech in here, just to make sure you have access to Darkest, but then don't play more than the 1, just because once you have a Diabolos somewhere in your hand or grave, you don't really need Dragon Ravine anymore in this particular build. So just the 1 of on that. And then I like the 3 copies of Darkest Diabolos in here. This is your main win condition. It's a level 8 dark dragon monster. Konami thinks it's a fiend in a lot of their printings, but it's a dark monster. Essentially, 3,000 attack, 2,000 defense is already solid for a boss, but he has some really powerful abilities. Can't be targeted while he's face up on the field or tributed, so no kaijus, no mirror match scenarios, and can't be targeted in general with annoying cards. So that's already really powerful, and then you can only use the bullet point effects, each of them once per turn. So the first one is, if a dark monster you control is tributed except during the damage step, you could special summon this card from the graveyard if it was already there when the card was tributed, or you can summon this card from your hand regardless of whether or not it was already there. And that's a really weird way of wording it, but essentially that means if you were to go through and tribute your Arima to search your Darkest Diabolos, it doesn't matter whether or not the Diabolos was in your hand. When you tributed Arima, you're going to be able to summon the Lord of the Lair. And the reason for that is essentially when you're resolving the effect of Arima, you end up with Lord of the Lair in your hand, and then you're able to summon it. It's this weird window type of thing that just happens with this game. But that's the reason it's worded that way. And then the second effect is you could tribute a dark monster, could be anything really, even your opponent's guy with Lair, and then your opponent has to place 1 card from their hand, either on top or bottom of their deck. Not necessarily going to stack them all the time because they can choose the bottom. They might be able to search that back, but that's going to minus them in exchange for your 1. So it's a 1-for-1 exchange, but then, if you have another Diabolos in the grave and you haven't summoned it already, you could replace it with that guy. You could go ahead and, use some other effect alongside it to basically gain some advantage. Very powerful card all around, and we're going to take advantage of its stat line besides just the massive 3k and protection ability. So then from there, we're going to start talking about some tech choices to access those key cards here. So 1 copy of Foolish Burial. This is a no-brainer in this strategy because we want to get our Darkest Diabolos into the grave, and especially with the decrease in numbers of Dragon Shrine and Dragon Ravine, it makes sense in this build especially. Then from here, I like playing 2 copies of the Melody of Awakening Dragon, which lets us discard any card from our hand, doesn't have to be a monster, in order to add up to 2 dragon monsters with 3,000 or more attack and 2,500 or less defense from your deck to your hand. So Blue Eyes stats, but they kind of separate them, more attack, less defense, and this is cool because 3,000 attack, check, and 2,000 defense is less than 2,500, check. Darkest Diabolos is a target for Melody of Awakening Dragon. You can discard 1 and keep 1 in your hand, and then, do some plays and then summon them to your field. Of course, only once per turn, but still very nice. This card's not once per turn. And so every so often you do draw extras of these, so that's why we are going to play some other cards that will help make sure we can resolve these if we need to. Rarely does that happen, but, you know, in the case with this turbo deck, you're thinning so much, drawing so much, it's not a terrible idea to have one more copy of a card you could search, because, you know, we only have 3 Diabolos. You take out 2 of those, and then you have 1 card left. That's where the Blue-Eyes Toon Dragon I mentioned at the beginning comes from. But we have 2 trade-ins, so now if you add the Diabolos to your hand, you go pitch it and draw 2 cards, and that also is where we tie in to then Blue-Eyes Toon Dragon, because this is another target to search off of the melody and discard off of trade-in. That's really its only use. You could take advantage of the fact Blue-Eyes is a light monster and do like BLS or something if you wanted more power in your deck. I chose the more consistent route in this case and didn't play the BLS because I felt, you know, it's a nice power card, can end the game, but wanted to make sure that it was always live, and I didn't want to rely on a one of light monster for that strategy. But from there, Blue-Eyes Toon Dragon is of course searchable by our 3 copies of Toon Table of Contest, who can search any Toon card. They interestingly removed Manga Ryuran, so I'm guessing future prints of that card will say in the text box, this card is always treated as a Toon monster. Not sure quite yet, but you know, just a little bit of trivia there. Lets you add, you know, other copies of itself, and then you go into either your Blue-Eyes Toon Dragon, or you can go for your Toon Cannon Soldier, which is our next card here. So reason this card is awesome isn't so much the burn damage, although, you know, that could help you win in time with, you know, the new rules and all that. Main reason you want this, though, is it's a dark monster. Tribute your opponent's guys with Lair of Darkness, or just tribute itself or another guy. You trigger Diabolos and summon that for free. So now you have 4 copies of a kaiju that's able to essentially go and get rid of your opponent's stuff. So I definitely like that. And don't forget, this is one of the weird tunes. If you have Toon World and it's destroyed, this thing will die. But if you don't play Toon World, which we don't, it doesn't matter. Like, you're never going to have Toon World kill this thing. Can't attack the turn it's summoned, so do keep that in mind. But I think the accessibility off of Toon Table more than makes up for that. And then, you know, you can go and burn your opponent for 500 for every monster you sack. So take advantage of all those extra tokens that you have, and then you'll get them back during your end phase anyway with the Lair of Darkness effect. Then from here, I like playing some additional copies of cards that will allow us to trigger our Diabolos. So we play 3 copies of Lilith, Lady of Lament, 2000 attack, level 3 monster. It does cut herself to 1000 attack upon normal summon, so do keep that in mind. But as a quick effect, and that's the key thing here, the quick effect during either turn lets you tribute a dark monster on your side of the field, potentially your opponents with Lair of Darkness, to reveal 3 normal traps from your deck, and then your opponent has to randomly choose one to add to your field, set it face down, and you shuffle the rest back, and you can only use that effect of Lilith once per turn. Cool thing is, just like Power Tool Dragon and a lot of these other random searchers, random means your opponent is not allowed to see what they picked, so you could play some mind games with that if you would like. Just a little thing to remember, you don't have to reveal that to your opponent. This card does not require you to do that, and then if you bring this thing back from the graveyard or something, or special summon it in some other way, then it does get the full attack power. But best thing about this is it's a quick effect, so you can get rid of your opponent's monsters during their turn, which is a step above Arima or any of these other cards like Toon Cannon Soldier that we've mentioned so far. And then the traps that we play because of those are 3 copies of any viruses. I like playing Eradicator because this thing just totally kills people when you call spell. And then Full Force Virus, just because, you know, Crush card's been nerfed and now it's absolutely trash in most matchups. Then you have the, what was it, the Deck Devastation. I guess that's good against like hand traps, but it's still not the best. Full Force is still pretty decent at getting rid of most of your opponent's tools to fight you, and so I really do like this thing. And then on top of that, I like playing the 2 Mind Crush. So the idea here is these viruses are chosen over Grinning Grave, because Grinning Grave doesn't let you see all of your opponent's hand and stuff. They let you see the draws, but not everything else. And so the information you get off of these 5 cards is a lot more useful to me in controlling my opponent's plays, knowing what to tribute, than just getting rid of, you know, 4 random cards or whatever the Grinning Grave would be able to do, and then, you know, it's just not good enough of a card in my opinion. That's why I'm playing these viruses. Mind Crush again plays into that mentality of you can see your opponent's hand if they haven't discarded the maximum number allowed by the Forbidden and Limited list, or game mechanics of just, you know, 3 per deck. So you call a card, lots of cards are searching and drawing your opponent's stuff that you know what you know exactly what they have. call that thing, get rid of all copies, and then you're able to see the rest of their hand, so you know exactly what to sack with the rest of your cards. Do remember you have to have a card in your hand in order to activate and resolve this thing, but you have so many dead cards in your hand, you know, just have an extra Diabolos. If you miss, you send that to the grave, but most of the time you're going to be calling with Mind Crush when you know exactly what's up anyway, so I'm not too worried about that. But 5 traps here, mainly to make sure that when we search, we do have access to 3 of them, even if we've drawn some out or whatever. And then kind of falling into the path of Lilith, I do like 3 copies of enemy controller, and so this basically lets us go and tribute during our opponent's turn as well as our own. During your turn, you can get rid of like tokens or something from Lair of Darkness, or just whatever, and steal your opponent's guy. If you have Lair of Darkness up, you could sack their monster to steal another one of their monsters, so you get rid of 2 cards for 1, especially if you make like a link summon or something to follow up with whatever you took from your opponent. So this card's extremely good just for that. Definitely like playing that. Plus, you know, it just happens to be the JD Gaming logo as well. And then some additional support cards here. This is a no-brainer. 3 copies of Allure of Darkness. Basically, don't play this thing blindly if you don't have a dark monster. It's kind of risky because a lot of the dark monsters that you would want to draw into are key cards you'd want to play, but in general, it's going to be a safe pick. You can melody into extra copies of Darkest Diabolos, or you could go in Toon Table into your Cannon Soldier. Lots of free dark monsters exist in this strategy, so Allure is pretty good for that. This also lets you fix your hand for redundancy when you have, you know, I already have a Terraforming, so do I need a Rima? No, not necessarily, unless I need it to trigger Diabolos. So Allure of Darkness is a nice 3 of. Don't forget, these things can be played, you know, as like however many copies you have, you could play all of them if you want. So that's a nice bonus there, not restricted to once per turn. And then Monster Reborn, this thing's awesome because sometimes you just bring back Diabolos and you win the game. I remember playing Lair of Darkness first when it came out against my brother. He Monster Reborned my Diabolos right after I sacked it off a virus. I thought I was in control with that virus, but Reborn went and basically made it so I couldn't deal with my own Diabolos, and I just lost the game. Just shows you how powerful Diabolos is, and this Reborn is just a very powerful card in getting you the Diabolos easily off of one card and getting you potentially other cards like Lilith at full attack power, Arima, Toon Cannon Soldier, you know, things you can use to tribute your opponent's stuff with Lair, get extra advantage, and then you trigger the Diabolos. So lots of really cool ways you can use this card, so definitely do like the one of in a grave-centric deck. And then the last 2 cards, this is what I would strongly recommend here. You could play some other fillers like Pot of Desires, for example, you know, just resolve that after you do your searches and you're fine. Upstart Goblin also works nicely here as well, but I chose 2 copies of Called by the Grave because this deck, not only is Diabolos such a huge liability to hand traps, and I guess other copies of Called by the Grave as well, but you want to make sure that you have this thing to stop your opponent's Ash Blossoms on your draw spells, especially if you're playing something like Trade-In or Melody. You're going to lose way too much if your opponent is able to successfully hit you with that. So Called by the Grave is just a flexible out to hand traps, especially in this strategy, to make sure your turbo engine does exactly what it's built to do. And then, you know, it has some extra flexibility where your opponent didn't have the hand trap. All right, now you can oppress them during their turn and get some extra control as well. So this would be the thing I strongly recommend in that last spot. And then for the extra deck, honestly, I don't have one for this deck anymore. Last time I built this deck, I ended up playing the Ancient Fairy Dragon and the Dark Strike Fighter, both of which were summoned easily off of Destrudo as just a level 7 Synchro monster, and they had integral parts in the strategy, but the rest of it, you know, I just left up to play other Link monsters, some other generic 7s, maybe even some Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries targets. But in this strategy, really, you're not summoning a ton of extra monsters out. That's one of the benefits, right? Because you're only using Lord of the Lair as your main monster. It's in the main monster zone, so your opponent can't extra link you out. You have some burn ability with your Toon Cannon Soldier as well, so you have some advantage there against other decks like Trickstars that might be trying to game you with 200 in time. You know, you have this nice little counter strategy going on here against the current metagames because you're able to deal with just your main deck and then not worry about your extra. Are there times you could play things? Yeah, you get free Torment tokens, so you could easily go and turn those into, like, Link Spider's a good one. You can go and use additional copies of things. You could even link off of your opponent's guys with your Econ, so definitely have an extra deck of Link monsters, but it'd just be a generic 15-card extra deck, mainly of Link monsters, maybe Ash, or not Ash, but Ghost Reaper targets for your side deck if you would like. I'm not going to decide specifics here for you guys because realistically, it's just whatever floats your boat. Use whatever is going to help you the most in the environment that you play specifically. So that's just a quick word on the extra deck. If you watched the video in its entirety, thanks! Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing the creation of this deck in its new reincarnation as much as I did putting it together. We'll start off with the main deck here, mainly because that's all I'm showing today. I'll explain why in just a second here. But our 40-card main deck is triple Arima, the Wicked Warden, a lone Blue Eyes Toon Dragon, triple Boss Monster, �11𝗍 Diabolos, Lord of the Lair, triple Lilith, Lady of Lament, and a single Toon Cannon Soldier for a very slim monster lineup. Then for our spells, we play triple Allure of Darkness, double Call by the Grave to stop that Ash. We got Dragon Ravine at 1, triple JD Gaming, Foolish Burial, triple Structure Deck Name, Monster Reborn, triple Terraforming, double the Melody of Awakening Dragon, triple Toon Table of Contents, double Trade-In, and then for our traps we play a playset essentially of a virus through 1 Eradicator and 2 Full Force Virus, and then we have double Mind Crush, and that rounds up everything to a 40-card main. Reason I'm not showing an extra deck here, you are playing one, that's the first answer to the obvious question here. I mentioned in the last segment here in the video, Torment tokens from Lair of Darkness can be used for like Link Spider or whatever. You can econ your opponent's monsters and then go and link up with your guys as well. Maybe with tokens, maybe with some other guy like Diabolos who will come back anyway. So definitely do have generic Link monsters in here, but then the rest of the 15 cards that you have in here honestly can be whatever works best in your play environment. Maybe you want to play Blackwing Steam the Cloak as a tuner monster in this main deck because that card actually works pretty nicely here. Okay, then you could go ahead and play some synchro monsters you might be able to play off of that level 3 tuner. You could go ahead and play Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries targets if that's going to be in your side deck, or if you want to main deck it to go against Sky Strikers and things like that. So lots of options exist. So I didn't want to tie you down to 15 specific cards because realistically most of the time I'm just going for generic Link monsters like Borolo Dragon and stuff anyway, or not using the extra deck at all. So feel free and play around with that and use whatever floats your boat. That's the end of this video, but if you'd like to see more of this series, you can click the annotation on the right, or you can see the last video I did by clicking the one on the left. If you enjoyed, I encourage you guys to leave a like and share it with others you think who may enjoy it as well. And if you'd really like to see more updates, then subscribe to JD Gaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JD Gaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.